Alright, in this tutorial we are going to explore game objects in Unity, but before we do that I wanted to show you something. So we have created a project and my project was called Unity Tutorial. If I navigate to the folder where it is stored, we see that it is not a file Unity creates. Say, for instance, if you have a CAD program and you create a new project, it will store one file typically. Unity creates projects in folders. So my project is called Unity Tutorial, as you can also see here. And when I expand that, a lot of folders and sometimes also subfolders have been created. This is then your Unity project in very many files. So if, for instance, you wanted to make a backup of your project, which is always recommended, you would typically compress this in an archive and save it as, say, for instance, a zip file. Or when you want to share a Unity project, you always share this whole folder. We are also going to work a little bit with assets as our tutorials progress, and I have prepared a few for you, and you find them in our Google Drive in Assignment 5, Handouts, and Assignment 5, and there is a folder called Tutorial Resources. So please download this folder and everything it contains to your hard drive. You will need it not right away, but as we progress with these intro tutorials. Alright, so back to the Unity editor. And if before you saw your game objects listed in the hierarchy and they are not visible anymore, which can happen, you can expand the sample scene with the little triangle to the left and you get them back. So let's now save our scene, go to File, and not Save Project, but Save As. That will save the scene. Save Project will save the entire thing. We go to Save As, and then we are taken to our project folder that I just showed you. In Assets, there is a Scene folder created by default, and then we call this something like First Scene. Then the file name changes here in the scene name. So what I didn't mention in the editor intro are these buttons here. Again, down the line we are going to explore them a little bit, but there is one that says toggle visibility of gizmos, and here we can select what we want to see. So if we click it, for instance, then when we select the directional light, etc., we are not getting the icon anymore. So if these things disappear, you simply click that icon. Okay, now we have three game objects here: a main camera, a directional light, and a global volume. The global volume controls how things are rendered. So here we have, for instance, tone mapping, bloom, and vignette activated. We can also deactivate this by this little checkbox. And it changes a little bit how our scene appears. So for instance, this vignette effect will be visible. If we deselect it, it's not visible. This can be useful to deactivate as we add it, because for once it gives us a little bit more performance, but also a little bit of clarity. Say, for instance, this bloom and the vignette can irritate. So if they do, you can deactivate the global volume. It is also possible to add some more features here, maybe something we cover in a later tutorial. All right, so now let's create a first game object. For this purpose, we have two options. We can either right-click in the hierarchy or go up top to Game Object, and then we have a number of game objects we can create. We create a 3D object, and let's say it's a plane. Unity will then create a plane, calling it plane. And if you scroll with your mouse forward and backward, you can move around in the scene. The key is WASD. With no game object selected, I also allow you to move a little bit. You can click the middle mouse button and pan. And when we select the plane, we see it has a few components in the inspector. Firstly, it has a position. And this position is looking rather arbitrary. You can select this and 0, 0, 0 this out, so it's set on the world origin. Then the plane also has a mesh filter, meaning it's a mesh. Game engines render only meshes. It has a mesh renderer component that is active, telling Unity that the plane should be rendered. So this is different from deactivating the plane, which I could do. That deactivates the whole plane. If we just deactivate the mesh renderer, Unity will still show us the plane, but not rendered. There may be an application where this is useful. Then it has what's called a mesh collider, so that is to simulate collisions, and then down below it has a material. So 3D objects typically have these components initially, but with the add component we can give them, so to say, more features. Okay, so we have a plane and we can make it larger, for instance, by scaling it. So remember, Y is up, so that scale will not do anything. But if we change X to 3 and Z to 3, the plane gets larger. We can also click and drag the size here. Is it working? Yeah, so you left click and drag, and then you can manually adjust sizes. Let's say we will work with a plane of 1 by 1 for this example. So let's now create another game object. And here we right-click in the hierarchy. So that's an alternative method. And let's create a cube. So again, we can zero out its position and can zoom in, and we see a cube dropping a shadow on the plane. Its position, which is the center of the cube, is 0, 0, 0, so it intersects with the plane. And here, for instance, this global volume becomes a little bit irritating, so I can turn it off, and then this is a little bit clearer. Back to the cube. Again, it has the same components as the plane, just the collider here is different. The plane had a plane collider, the box has a box collider. So if we wanted to have the cube standing on the plane, we can drag these arrows that are similar to what you know from Twinmotion, or we can adjust the vertical position manually. Our cube size is 1 by 1 by 1 meter. So if we move it up 0.5 meters, it will stand exactly on the plane. If we wanted to rotate the cube, there are two ways. There's a rotate tool to the left, where you can simply drag along these axes and the cube will rotate. So that is true for all game objects, not just for cubes. We can also use the scale tool, looks the same as in Twinmotion, and scale the cube in any direction. So if we are with our view inside the cube, we are not seeing it because it's single-sided geometry. If we zoom out, then it becomes apparent. If you right-click with your mouse, you can rotate around the scene. Worth exploring that. Get a good look how your scene appears. And active game objects are always marked in red. So this rectangular tool and the transform tool is not something we will need right away. Maybe we explore it later. But let's say you messed your cube up, you want to revert it to how it originally was. You could hit Ctrl C a couple of times, but you can also reset the rotation and the scale. So rotation 0, 0 and the scale 1 to 1 to 1, and it reverts to the cube. Now let's move our cube up a little bit, which we can do with the move tool. Say something like here, shadow response. Let's quickly check the game view, which will render what this camera sees. So when we select the camera, we get a little preview of the game view. And there we see the view from the camera. Unity also indicates this with a camera count. Okay, so if we hit play, we see the plane and the cube hovering, and that's it. So now let's give the cube an additional component that simulates gravity, which is something we can do in Unity, and that is done in the inspector with the cube selected. We add a component, and there we get a search bar, and we type rigid or just rig, and then we have rigid body and rigid body 2D. Let's select rigid body. So a rigid body shows us a few physical characteristics. A mass, a drag, using gravity is checked, and so force, a collision detection, and a few other things that are not important right now. So we have the cube now with a rigid body. If we now hit play, the cube falls down and it collides with the plane. It does that because the plane has a mesh collider and the cube has a box collider. So just the cube has a rigid body, the plane doesn't, meaning the plane is not exposed to gravity, it will stay in place. And that's how we can simulate an object falling down. Let's now reset the position of the cube to 0.5 as it was. Resize it a little bit to y2 and x 0.1. So now it's too high, 2 units high, and if we put the y position to 1, then it will stand on the plane. Okay, so if now, for instance, we rotate our plane, our cube a little bit, and we hit play, it's going to fall down. There's a little glitch here, not sure if you can see it. When it intersects with the plane, the collision may not be absolutely correct. But let's reset the rotation, and with the game object selected and the move tool, we can hit Ctrl D, which creates a duplicate of our object, which is currently marked. We can move that duplicate, Ctrl D again, move the duplicate, Ctrl D again, and I suppose you're starting to see where we are heading with that. If now we tilt this first cube a little bit, let's check how it looks in the game view. Currently a little bit far away. We can also adjust our game view to exactly what we have in the editor, selecting the main camera, game object up top, align with view, and you will see that the main camera has changed its position and rotation. When we then hit play, we have, in a way, created a domino game. And with that concept, we are going to work a little bit more, but that was it for this very early intro tutorial on game objects and their components.